I designed a new F-Zero game. Kinda. It's been about 21 years since an F-Zero game has hit the shelves, if we aren't counting F-Zero 99, which may get the Mario 35 treatment soon with his dwindling player base. 21 years, that's old enough to drink. Here's to you, buddy. But what's the reason it's been so long since a real new F-Zero game? For one, the games haven't sold the best compared to the other Nintendo games. But if we take the words directly from Mr. Miyamoto himself, we see a lot of other designers who are kind of making more traditional racing style games. So we try and focus on something that feels a little bit more gamey. So maybe if we create a new type of controller interface and we find that controller interface is particularly suited for F-Zero, then maybe we'll do something again with it in the future. This was from 2015, so it seems like they just can't figure out how to make a new game work in the current ecosystem, especially when it would compete in a similar playing field to the racing Goliath Mario Kart. And while I am happy for the nods to F-Zero and Mario Kart 8, driving around Mute City in 200cc with a blue Falcon and Mii outfit it isn't the same. I've had years to theorize something that not only I would want from an F-Zero game, but something Nintendo would want as well. I present to you F-Zero Infinity. Now what is F-Zero Infinity? Well, besides being a way to shoehorn an X into the title of another game, it represents the endless replayability this entry will provide. A lofty claim, no doubt. But I think I have concepts that will back it up. Now, I've played hours upon hours of the F-Zero games, more than a normal person probably should. And while I love them to death, there are two big factors that cripple their ability to flourish in the market. And that is accessibility and retention. I want you to keep these in mind, because going forward, many of the ideas I propose are aimed at combating these two main points. Now, it's no secret that F-Zero has a reputation for being extremely difficult with a high skill ceiling, requiring precise inputs and driving to play well. And that's a tough sell to a majority of people. Most folks who load up GX are going straight to the story mode and gaze upon a sea of while they try and acclimate to the controls and systems. It's not hard to see why a casual player might opt for a more relaxed experience of Mario Kart when the driving is more forgiving and it has systems to hold the player's hand as they learn the ropes. Falling behind? Here's a bullet bill. Can't drive at all? Here's an option where you never fall off the map and we accelerate for you. Now, I'm not saying we should implement these exact systems into F-Zero. However, we do need to have a smooth onboarding process for new players to learn the mechanics the game has to offer. The goal is not just to sell the hardcore F-Zero fans on a new game, but to sell the casual players on a new game as well by providing a forgiving learning curve to nourish a new generation of F-Zero fans. So we have a new influx of players. How do we keep them there? This is a tough question to answer, and is one that so many of these games struggle to do. We see it even with F-Zero 99. It's had an explosion onto the scene, but the player base has dwindled away. What do you do when you beat all the cups and finish the story? Play with a new ship or a harder difficulty? Perhaps time trials? Those are options, sure, but nothing that a casual player would likely stick around for. You could argue that they got their $60 worth, and hopefully they did, but I think what I've conjured up will let us have our cake and eat it too. Using F-Zero GX as a jumping off point, it's time to get into the meat and potatoes of what changes and additions would be realized in F-Zero Infinity, starting with the track editor. One of the coolest features of an F-Zero game wasn't even seen by 99% of their audience, which was the track editor for F-Zero X. Only available on the failed N64 disk drive add-on in Japan, this expansion allowed players to make their own tracks and ships, with only the latter making it to GX. If they were to bring this track editor feature into a new game, they could have an online forum for people to download and upload tracks and Grand Prix, sort of like how Mario Maker or Smash Bros works. The reason why I bring up the track editor first is this would breathe so much life into the game, and could extend to every aspect of it too. Players suddenly have an endless fountain of tracks to race on. Competitive types can compete for the best time trial times, and creative types can find a niche for making cool and unique courses. Depending on how hard Nintendo would want to lead into this, they could promote a track of the week, or host a Grand Prix tournament using user-created courses, and players could earn badges depending on what accolades they accomplished. Speaking of Grand Prix, there would also be the traditional way of racing, which is the Grand Prix of Nintendo-made tracks. There isn't really much to revamp here from GX, but there are a couple things that would make cool additions. A first big add would be bringing back X Cup from F-Zero X, which, for those who don't know, is a Grand Prix of randomly generated tracks. This was such a fun feature that to this day I still occasionally load up just to experience the absurdity of some of the maps, like this one. The X Cup could take tracks made from people online and use those if there's an online connection, and racers could thumbs up or download a course after playing them as well. Another feature that would be a nice touch for Grand Prix would be allowing multiple players to race locally or online. Even if in the sake of fairness the scores don't count towards completion, being able to race in a competitive environment where you could see the scores would be great for friends looking to prove supremacy over each other. Versus and Time Trial. There's not much in GX that would require tuning with the Versus and Time Trial modes going into Infinity, as these are pretty standard features of any racing game. However, incorporating online capabilities, as previously mentioned, would allow them to be a little more robust in their scope, providing a leaderboard for online races and time trials, accolades and trophies for a player's profile for reaching certain feats, and the ability to compete for the best times in custom-made tracks would foster a community of players creating and competing. Practice Mode. Practice Mode is a great way of learning maps and the different turns and hazards of each one. Something that would make an amazing addition would be sort of a skate park map, where you could go around free roam and be able to test out different tech and experiment with terrain without the pressure of being in a race or an actual course. Another addition that would do wonders for newer players is to add interactive tutorials that would show, then guide players to performing these techniques. There's an insane amount of movement option and variables present in these games that a localized place to teach people these mechanics would lower the barrier to entry on a new title. Customization. F-Zero GX has a custom vehicle creator, which I think would make a terrific comeback in Infinity. Allow players to make their own custom car parts, paint jobs, decals, and let them share their creations and race them online in different game modes. A more robust control customization would be welcome as well. GX was revolutionary in allowing the adjustment of control stick dead zones, bringing that back, as well as full button customization, support for different controllers like the GameCube controller or gyro controls, is important to letting players play their way. Death Race. Something else that deserves a comeback is Death Race from F-Zero X. In this game mode, players race on a simple track until they kill every NPC and try to do it in the fastest time possible. It was rather bare bones in X, but it could be revamped in Infinity. Allow players to play on any track, base, or user created, and give people a fun little alternative to the traditional time attack mode, and have people fight for top spot on leaderboards in a different kind of time trial. Career Mode. Career Mode is something new that I've cooked up for F-Zero Infinity. I took inspiration from how a sports season works and used that to give racing more hooks to it. It would work as such. A player picks any character and would simulate them starting in F-Zero circuit. Players would progress through the calendar month to month, participating in various mini and Grand Prix, and making decisions on off days to temporarily improve stats as prep for the upcoming event. For example, a Grand Prix may be coming up in a couple days, and the courses are going to have a lot of tight turns. You may choose to boost your grip stat in preparation for the race. Another example would be your sponsor wants you to KO at least 3 opponents in the next race, in which case you would focus on upping your car's body. Non-race days allow the opportunity for random events to occur and keep the game loop interesting. These wouldn't be anything super in-depth, but simple things like dialogue trees that influence who your rivals and allies are in the upcoming event, sponsor offers and demands, as well as deals on ship parts. As you progress through the months, you'll gain money through sponsorships and race placements to buy parts for your ship to improve your stats, deck out your ride with decals, or bribe other racers to help you in the upcoming race. To keep races fresh, the game can pull courses from the custom track feature for various events, so players aren't always racing on the same 30-ish tracks. And depending on who you attack, bribe, or leave alone in races would also influence how certain other racers feel about you and how aggressive they are to you. Think like the system they had in the SSX games. At the end of the year, the main Grand Prix takes place and the players race for the grand prize on the Nintendo-made courses. Whether they take home a W or lose a Grand Prix, they can continue to the next season and the cycle begins anew. Though there is some progression, as players will slowly be improving their ships, relations, and capital. The career mode can be played endlessly with enough variation to keep things from getting stale. Now that we got all the other modes out of the way, it's time to focus on the big feature in F-Zero Infinity, which is Story Mode. I think people would be a little disappointed coming from GX that there was no story in the new game. Luckily, I have cooked something that I think new players and veterans will both love. Though this mode carries a lot of similarities to career mode, story mode is much more narratively focused. The story follows a new character that was born in Port Town and saved by Captain Falcon at a young age. Wanting to follow in his hero steps, they use the mechanical skill to jerry-rig together an F-Zero machine. It is a jalopy of a vehicle, which gives a low reason why it starts with low stats, but it is enough to start racing in the amateur league. Ideally, this character would be pretty robust in customization, being able to choose things like gender, build, and possibly even race. However, I do realize that this can be a lot to implement into a game, so a simple male-female option could work, but for the sake of this pitch, I'm going to refer to the main character as Cody. This is not an official name for them or anything, it's just a moniker I've dubbed to make things easier. But the synopsis goes as such. You follow Cody in their quest to enter and win the F-Zero Grand Prix, starting from the beginning. Like career mode, this operates on a seasonal timeline, with the player progressing through the calendar up into the Grand Prix. However, the circuits and off days have much more story wrapped around them, allowing already established characters to have some personality. The introduction starts off with Cody going on a test ride in his new machine and runs into a professional racer, say Samurai Goro, who challenges him to a race. This is where the tutorial race begins. We have to assume players will choose this mode first, so it's important to ease them into learning the controls and mechanics. With this in mind, the track is rather wide, light turns, and generous with its boost chargers. Now, racing against someone like Goro, you're obviously meant to get absolutely smoked. So after the player gets a handle of driving and does a couple laps, they meet Goro at the finish line, who gloats and runs off. Cody's driving grabs the attention of old veteran Silver Nielsen, who wants to take him under his wing and train a racing protege. This is where the real meat of the story comes in. Nielsen bankrolls Cody an upgrade to the machine of the player's choice, bumping the stats up from all E's to a D in one stat. Cody then accompanies Nielsen on his cruiser, which hops around from planet to planet where the next race is being held. The off days before the race would operate in a similar fashion to how StarCraft 2's story works. Players are allowed to roam around the ship, upgrade and customize their vehicle, and talk with familiar faces either through holo video or in person. Players can also participate in an optional simulator on the ship that includes tutorials for more advanced techniques, allowing players to complete them if they fancy learning new mechanics and maybe a little cosmetic reward for completing them. Or they can ignore them if they already know how to play the game. Having a hub where Cody can talk to existing characters in the universe allows the already impressive cast to have a more fleshed out personalities and lets the player fall in love with them even more. Sure, there are little text bios and interviews in the other games, but talking to them in a face-to-face situation gives a more personal connection to the characters rather than look at these funny little guys. The interactions and dialogue exchange can lead to different variables in the races too. For example, here's how a story arc might shake out. There is a race starting up in the jungle planet in the next 3 days. Nielsen's cruiser makes orbit around the planet, and Cody has the opportunity to roam around and talk to the crew and learn about the planet before the race. They soon learn that Biorex and Billy are planning to enter the race and are causing mayhem with each other. Beastman, being a rival to Biorex and Dangerous Beast, enters the race as well, and Cody has the decision to play sides of the three-way rivalry or not to play any sides at all. Backing one of the characters will make the others more hostile to you in the race and in future ones, but you gain an ally in doing so. They may have a condition for you to gain rep during the race too, something like destroy one or two of the other rivals or complete the race without ever refilling up to full HP. Depending on how the race shakes out, players can also gain and lose reputation with these characters, and there might be some little dialogue with them after the race which would vary depending on what unfolded. Players gain their earnings from the race and they proceed to the next planet. Players can use the money gained in races on the cruiser to upgrade or customize their ship, or there may be occasions where they can use some of that cash and dialogue options. A couple things worth noting. One is that until later in the story mode, not every character is going to show up in every race. There may only be a couple familiar faces, and the rest are nameless ships that could possibly pull from the ships online. This gives characters time to shine without stepping on each other's toes, as there is a large cast for this franchise. Second thing to note is that though your vehicle starts off with poor stats, you will upgrade it over time to be amazing. All A's if you played your cards right. Also, though its initial stats are bad, that doesn't mean it would be impossible to win or the car controls like garbage. Starting out, your vehicle has a lower top speed, so things like grip and boost wouldn't need to be as strong. So the stats may be bad on paper, but they scale depending on how fast you're actually going. This does two things. First is you don't want first time players driving an insanely fast car right off the bat, but you want it to also be decent to control too, so this would hit both those marks. Secondly, once the cars start going faster, the upgrades that the players do purchase will have a greater effect. If you max out a car's boost but nothing else, later in the campaign the vehicle will be a glass missile that is extremely hard to control. Now obviously this would happen gradually over time, so they have time to buy other upgrades to even it out, but the option to min-max certain stats is there if that's how they want to play. Now eventually, after hopping from planet to planet, from race to race, you end up at the F-Zero Grand Prix, the most coveted and famous Grand Prix in the universe. Everyone you met along the way has made it to the finale. All the friends and enemies you made join you in the last races. Even your hero, Captain Falcon, is present at the event. This moment will have a lot of impact because players have had time to get familiar with all the different racers, their motivations, their rivalries, and influence their disposition with them. The variety of friends you made along the way can lead to fun little wrinkles in the races, spanning anywhere from everyone leaving you alone to the whole cast wanting your head. Either way, the player competes in all the races aiming to be the top of the leaderboard when the last checkered flag is flown. Whether this be a normal Grand Prix of 5 to 6 tracks or a gauntlet of every F-Zero track, I've kind of yet to decide, as I can see the merits to both formats, but I do think weaving in one final story arc with Captain Falcon, Black Shadow, and Blood Falcon within the Grand Prix would be a fitting ending to the campaign. I toyed with the idea of specific endings depending on who you choose to align with in the Grand Prix, but I'm unsure if that's something that's worth pulling the trigger on. Regardless, players receive a bad end if they lose the Grand Prix, and a good ending if they win it. The player gets some rewards and unlocks and can partake in New Game Plus where they go through the campaign again starting with their souped up vehicle from the first playthrough. The ability to restart and keep your upgrades as well as all the different story decisions you can take encourages more replay value for the campaign. If a New Game Plus doesn't tickle their fancy, players can bring their characters into career mode or use them in other game modes. Though multiplayer they'd probably have to race in custom vehicle specific races for balance's sake. Finale. Now I admit, I'm no narrative Shakespeare, so a lot of my ideas are more mechanics focused, and I leave many of the specific story beats and plot for someone who is better at weaving a story. But I think the trappings we have here is more than enough of a hook to grab people's attention and put some fuel into the tank of this idling franchise. Now if you stuck with me this far, I want to thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed what you've seen, which I hope you did since you made it to this point, consider sharing this around. Who knows, maybe this will end up in the hands of someone who can make a new game a reality and spark some inspiration into them. And if this video sparked inspiration in you, I'd love to hear your ideas as well. Now, of course, this is a concept for an IP that I have no rights for, so Nintendo is free to use these ideas as they will. Though as someone with a history working in the video games industry, I would love to help make the vision of this new game a reality. And as a thank you to everyone for watching, I'd like to leave this video off with a mock trailer I cooked up to get you hyped.
Our beacon of hope is gone. Some say that he abandoned us, that he turned tail and fled. Some say that he perished, swallowed by the same city that gave him life. Some say he retired, walked away from it all. There are a lot of things they say. I say, he's back.